Hi, my name is Dylan Barnes, and for my persuasive speech, I wanted to talk about why we should raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's scary to know how many Americans have to live paycheck to paycheck to make ends meet. Not only do they have to provide for themselves, but they also have to provide for their entire family. It has been over 13 years since the federal minimum wage was increased to $7.25 per hour. On the state level, many have raised their wage floor, but there are still 20 states, disproportionately southern states, uh, that have chosen to not raise the national minimum. Women and workers of color are disproportionately paid at or below the minimum wage, and the failure to increase the federally mandated minimum to coincide with the cost of living has caused these workers to earn subpar wages and struggle to meet their basic needs. It's fundamental that the federal and state governments work together to increase minimum wage to reduce poverty, decrease the wage gap, uh, help build a stronger economy, and most importantly, benefit workers. For my first point, I want to talk about how raising the wage can reduce income, racial, and gender inequalities. Due to past generations of occupational segregation, discrimination, and other impacts of systemic racism, racial pay disparities still exist today. While great progress has been made, Hispanic and Black workers are still paid significantly less than their white counterparts. In 2019, Hispanic workers were paid 10.9% less than comparable white workers, and Black workers were paid 14.9% less than their comparable white workers. Raising the minimum wage could greatly decrease the wage gap. Raising the wage to $15 an hour by the year 2025 would significantly reduce racial pay inequalities. It would actually disproportionately help people of color. Increasing the wage will benefit less than 1 out of 5 white workers, but 1 in 3 Black workers and 1 in 4 Hispanic workers. The service industry is dominated by women and people of color. Jobs like restaurant hosts, childcare providers, dishwashers, cashiers, fast food cooks, etc., which represent nearly 74% of occupations that pay at or below the federal minimum wage. We also can't forget about how the long history of women being underappreciated in the workforce is why they're underpaid today. In 2021, across all workers, women were paid 73 cents for every dollar a man made, while women of color experienced an even larger pay gap. By ending separate tipped wages would significantly help women of color because they are more likely to work in tipped jobs and be paid sub-minimal wages. For my second point, I'd like to talk about how increasing the minimum wage could decrease poverty and increase economic security. Raising the federal minimum wage to $15 by the year 2025 would increase the pay of around 32 million Americans. The Raise the Wage Act could lift millions out of poverty, including 1.3 million children. The current minimum just isn't high enough for some to afford housing. In 2022, a full-time worker needed to earn an hourly wage of $25.82 to afford a modest two-bedroom home in America. Uh, Millions of Americans who work full-time, year-round jobs can afford essentials like food and childcare, specifically 35% of U.S. families, 59% Hispanic families, 52% of Black families, 25% of white families, and 23% of Asian families who work full-time, year-round jobs still don't earn enough for basic necessities. This is a huge problem. This is why raising the minimum wage would be so beneficial. If the wage is raised, 91% of those who would benefit are over the age of 20, with 68% being over 25 years old, and most are the primary wage earners of their families, meaning they would actually have enough to take care of their loved ones. They will be able to afford putting a roof over their heads and food on the table while also having enough for proper health care and extra expenses like car keep up, not to mention those miscellaneous emergencies. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would not only allow individuals to afford basic needs, but it would allow them to invest in other resources like education and proper job training for themselves and their families, giving them a better chance to work at higher paying jobs with much better benefits like sick days, health insurance, or retirement plans. Increasing the wage will not only help individuals living paycheck to paycheck, but people who earn more than the minimum wage. For my final point, I'd like to talk about how raising the wage could strengthen the U.S. economy. With workers earning more money for themselves and their families, this would give them the opportunity to invest more in their communities and the economy overall. Due to the federal minimum wage not being indexed for inflation, its purchasing power has dropped significantly, hitting an all-time low, in fact, the lowest mark since 1956. If minimum wage matched inflation, worker productivity, along with other incomes, worker productivity would definitely increase, and worker and employee turnover would decrease. And economic activity increases, so with job growth. Economists have said that raising the minimum wage to just $10.10 would inject $2.2 billion net into the U.S. economy and create around 85,000 jobs. Which is just incredible. Also, by raising the federal minimum wage, the federal government would spend less on public assistance programs due to them being lifted out of poverty from the pay increase. Overall, there are so many benefits to lifting the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It has been predicted that even raising the federal minimum wage by an extra $1.75 would increase household spending by $45 billion. Leading to job growth and a boost to GDP. Increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour would lift approximately 7.6 million Americans out of poverty and lift the pay of around 32 million Americans. Currently, a bill has been introduced in Congress to enact the changing of the federal minimum wage. The Raise the Wage Act of 2021, if passed, the act will eliminate poverty-level wages by gradually increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 over a 5-year period. This is a very plausible solution to a huge problem plaguing our country. Every person deserves the opportunity to earn a living wage that can support them and their families. I thought this was a very important subject to me, and that's why I chose to talk about it, and thank you for listening.